we're going to be looking at the topic of what does it mean to be an MBSR teacher or to be a mindfulness teacher. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit now. I wanted to share with you the things that I have learned over the years. I've been a teacher for 50 years, and I've been a mindfulness teacher for 27 years. And I have to say that sometimes it feels like it was only yesterday. And at the same time, there is the weight of all those years and all the experiences that I've had, which I hope when sharing some of that with you, it will be supportive to you in your own work. 27 years ago, my first MBSR class at a local community college, what we call a Volkshochschule in Germany, the first night was so exciting. There were 20 people in the room, and it seemed to go well. And I was so excited at the end of the evening. I was really feeling up. And the next week, when the class arrived, there were only 7 students. There were a couple of reasons for that, one of which was I didn't have a chance in those days to do an orientation meeting. And I realized, to my heart attack, that in fact the first evening was in fact an orientation. And the second evening, and the courses were very, very reasonable in those days. The second evening was actually the start of the class because those 7 people had decided to come back. And those 7 people went through the whole program and had made the commitment. So again, in the middle of what was a very, very difficult experience, I learned a tremendous amount. And one of the things that I learned about being a teacher and being a mindfulness teacher is that, in fact, I had to give up being a teacher. I say that a bit provocatively, but actually that's what it felt like, because I was so challenged about what I thought my role was and what I thought I should be doing in the classroom. And one of the biggest things that I had to give up was the idea that I was the source of authority and that I was the one who determined how things went, and that I was the one who knew the answers. That again was something very hard for me in those days because my whole sense of security was so tied up in thinking that it was myself who was going to be showing everybody the way. What I had to come to realize, and what many of our students have said over the years now in MBSR training, is that they realize that they're not the source of authority, but they're much more a midwife to the process, to each person's process in the class. And like midwives, we can teach people skills, we can help them practice, but it's the mother who delivers the baby, not us. And so we support our students to nurture and cultivate their own mindfulness practice and helping them to have the skills and the power to be able to do that. But they're the ones that give birth. And what are they giving birth to? Well, among other things, I've found the most rewarding moments of being a teacher is when students share their insight, share their understanding of a pattern, share how a particular behavior is causing them suffering or discomfort or unhappiness, discovering that there are mindful ways of being that can actually support them and help them to live their lives in a way that they find fulfilling and not running away from the challenges that life poses. Some of the most rewarding moments for me as a teacher has been when someone has just said very simply, oh, so that's what's going on. Or there's another quote that the students have said, I don't know whether it was in my class or another class, where one time a student said, my thoughts are all over the place, but I'm staying here. And as a teacher of mindfulness, we are supporting our students to know how to stay here, to know how to be here in that moment. The other comparison I can make with giving birth is that in training mindfulness, it's the muscles of a woman's body that support her to give birth. And when those muscles can work in the way that they're designed, it's tremendously helpful. And it doesn't mean that there aren't problems, but the muscles and their health and their capacity to push is something that is very important. And it's the same thing in mindfulness. We have said many times in the program, and many teachers know this, we are helping students to train their muscle of mindfulness. And that muscle will be available to them, not only to help them to develop insight, but it can lead to a shift in their behavior, which they can sustain. What sustains it? Awareness. And the capacity to turn toward and sustain awareness is how we are supporting our students to practice mindfulness. Now, it's not easy, and it's a process, and it's step by step. But when we shift the perspective to the one who's doing it, to rather to being the facilitator, the supporter, then it becomes a whole different experience, not only for the student, but for us. I found it to be a tremendous relief to take the burden off my shoulders that I'm the one who's doing it all. And in a way, it's disempowering, not in a way. It's disempowering the student to think that they need to be shown how to do it in a way where they don't feel that they themselves have the capacity. And that's a very tricky thing in the beginning. Sometimes when we ourselves are insecure, we begin to doubt the capacity of the student to practice. And that's a very important moment when we can step back and become aware and reinvest our trust, not only in the process, but in the capacity of students to do this in their own way. Now, it may not be the way that we think, but for them, it is empowering to find their way to practice it. Another insight that another metaphor that's helped me tremendously is something that I have from my husband, who's a passionate gardener. And he thinks that I don't absorb anything he says, but in fact, that's not true at all. But don't tell him that. We talk a lot and use the word in mindfulness practice about nurturing and cultivating insight. We help them to plant their own seeds. And we facilitate and model how they can plant their seeds. We show them how to water their seeds, how to till the soil, how to take care of the garden. And we empower them and support them to be the gardener. And I think another really strong metaphor from gardening is the difference between plants that grow in a greenhouse and plants that grow outside in nature. Plants that come from a greenhouse are beautiful. And at Easter time, we have an amazing amount of plants that are available and look gorgeous. And most of them fade in a couple of days. Greenhouse plants do not have much resilience to withstand everyday life of being in a home or in a garden. Why? Well, one of the reasons I've learned is that because they don't have they don't have roots. They don't have strong roots. They've been propagated so quickly and fed with so much fertilizer that the top part of them blooms and looks gorgeous, but the roots are very weak, if existent at all. In MBSR, we nurture the roots. We as teachers know that cultivating the roots of the practice is what is going to allow each person's awareness and bloom to truly bloom and to be there and be resilient and be available to them when things are difficult. And let's just take a moment to let that metaphor of nurturing the garden, cultivating the garden of mindfulness. Because so much of what we do in class really, underneath what it seems to be, is actually tending to the roots, to cultivating stability, resilience, knowing when the roots need to be watered, knowing the right amount, all of which is a practice of trial and error. But that's what the program is so wonderful about. It allows our students, it allows practitioners of mindfulness to also experiment and for themselves begin to see what is helpful and what is not helpful to cultivating their stability. In becoming, we talk a lot about asking for a certain commitment to students in the mindfulness program. And that's a very, very important aspect. As students begin to even discover what that means. One of the great discoveries that students have is that this commitment is not for somebody else. It's making a commitment to themselves. And for many, that's a whole new area. Being able to ask themselves, what is important for me? What can I do? What can I commit to? How can I support myself to continue this commitment? We don't support students when we take away that opportunity of facing the challenge of committing to the practice. It might be difficult to resist when a student seems to having difficulty with an exercise being a certain length or finding a place in their lives where they can do it. But if we too quickly suggest alternatives, simply because we're uncomfortable with their discomfort, then we almost rob them of the opportunity of practicing in that way. The other commitment that's involved in MBSR is the commitment that we make to ourselves as teachers. We have said from the beginning, not just us, when I mean we, I mean teachers of mindfulness who've been doing this for a long time, that mindfulness is the heart of our practice. It is the source. Our own mindfulness practice is our well from which we can draw to help others nurture themselves and water themselves. And our own practice is our greatest resource. Yes, it's important to learn the exercises, to learn all the different aspects of being a mindfulness teacher, but that's not really, in the end, what is most lasting for students and for yourself. Our teaching and its authenticity comes from our own practice. And that doesn't mean that we have to wait to be practicing 15 or 20 or even 10 years. The very commitment that we make, even if we've been practicing 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, the commitment that we make each time we practice and understanding that this is a process and that we are developing, that is the kind of commitment we're talking about, because it's the same one we're asking our students. And that commitment and knowing that it's a process allows us to face one of the deepest ethical aspects of being an MDSR teacher. And that is, how can we teach what we don't know? That's come up a lot. Also in the various kinds of mindfulness programs that are being taught in the world, and which in some ways are presenting mindfulness as something that's easy, something that leads to happiness, sometimes something that can be done in 5 minutes a day. It's kind of like these fake weight loss programs where, lose 10 pounds in 3 days. We know from our own practice that that may seem attractive, but it's not really where the power of the practice comes from. And students know that. They sense that in the teacher. They sense when we're being honest. And we can have that kind of trust because we are practicing in that way as best we can. And there are ups and downs, and there are periods where you may feel a fake. A lot of our training students sometimes say they feel a hypocrite. I can't sit for 45 minutes every day. Well, the truth is, a lot of us can't. But we understand that even the commitment every day we sit down is part of that. It's not about being perfect. And when you begin to more and more feel that, then students give themselves permission, not because you told them. That rarely works. But what you embody. Even your own stumbling steps in this practice. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't train, that we don't work on delivering the exercises as best we can. I'm not encouraging incompetence. We do the best we can and we develop, but we're honest in a very, very deep way. And that is what is the true authenticity, I think, of being a mindfulness teacher. Another commitment that we make is going deeper in our practice. And what does that mean? It's not just about, sitting 45 minutes and being completely whatever we think is a good mindfulness practice. It's about the willingness to look at our practice and really understand how we are developing. I often like to say that this practice is about opening, deepening, expanding, and being grounded. And one doesn't contradict the other. But what can tremendously help in this is having a meditation guide. We've stressed the importance of a supervisor in learning to be an MBSR teacher, and how I think all of you have experienced how helpful it was to have a supervisor. I'd like to suggest, in fact, I will suggest, that it is very, very important to have a meditation facilitator, guide, you might even want to call them supervisor, someone who is helping you to look more deeply into your practice and to be with and work with the different aspects of it. It's very important because it's easy to get derailed. It's easy to get caught up in our own ideas and our own perspective. And a meditation supervisor or guide really can be a mirror for us, a mirror that we can trust ourselves to look into and see the areas where we may need to go deeper, see the areas where we need to go and often sometimes face. For myself, one of the areas was my idea that I could do it on my own, that I knew myself best and no one else could really know me the way that I did. But as I began to go deeper into practice, I found that I was treading water a lot and that I wasn't, it felt stuck. And I finally admitted to myself that I cannot do this alone. It wasn't easy. And I, in the supervision process, also began to understand why it wasn't easy. And I know many people have found that once they've made that decision to find a meditation guide, someone they can work with on a regular basis, they've come to appreciate that very, very deeply. And frankly, I think it belongs to being an MBSR teacher or mindfulness teacher as much as taking part in a qualified training program does. That's where you can really, as you go through the years, embody the practice less and less consciously because you are living it. You have become experienced in working with yourself, and in working with someone else, you can more easily adjust to when things are off. That in its turn helps with the idea that I'm the one that knows, I'm the authority. It was a relief and a challenge in my own meditation supervision to let go of the fact that I needed to know everything and truly discover what being humble to my own areas where I was unclear was the true source of becoming clearer. It's almost like everything that was a paradox became much more clearer because I no longer saw it as a paradox. I just saw it as an area where I needed to grow. In coming to the end of this talk, there's just one more thing I'd like to say. I would like to share with you how much I honor your commitment to take this path to becoming an MBSR teacher. It is a willingness to walk this path so that you can supportively guide others, that you empower yourself not to empower others, but to help them to empower themselves, that it's not easy, that it asks us to open and challenge ourselves and be willing to be there for that kind of growth that is necessary to keep our own flower blooming. And that it is a tremendous practice of service that you have decided to embark upon. This world, not only during this time of Corona, COVID-19, but this world desperately needs practices of clarity, of heartfulness, of depth. And mindfulness is at the heart of many of these practices that cultivate that. You have chosen to make this a part of your life. And that earns very deep respect from me and from others. It is a form of service in the truest sense of the word. I want to thank you for this effort that you've made to walk the path and to be a mindfulness and MBSR teacher.